P.O.P podcast, let's go. The P.O.P podcast, let's go. The P.O.P podcast starts now.
Welcome to an episode of the P.O.P podcast, the Brace for Impact series, where we dive into the stories of the most innovative orthodontists in the industry. I'm your host, Jason Sirotin, joined by my co-host, Scott Haley. Today, we're thrilled to welcome Dr. Colby Gage, a board-certified orthodontic specialist and the lead orthodontist at LevelUp Orthodontics in Parker, Colorado. Dr. Gage has dedicated himself to building a practice that delivers exceptional results and transforms lives. Welcome to the show, Dr. Gage. How are you?
Really good. Thank you for having me.
Scott, how do you guys know each other? You seem to have a history.
Our paths have crossed many years, right?
That's
so
right.
have had the privilege and opportunity to hear Dr. Gage speak several times. He's been a strong advocate for some of our vendor partners that I'm sure we'll touch on a little bit later in the call. But I think part of the cool thing about Dr. Gage is there is a little bit of connection in mentoring and helping younger orthodontists as they start their careers. So our paths have crossed on that front as well. So I'm excited to have him. We're excited to have him as be a very influential member of our P.O.P group. And I think he's got one of the coolest orthodontic journeys I've heard over the years. So that's why I wanted to get him on here and have him share a little bit about that.
Oh, thank you. No, yeah, it's definitely been great to meet you, Scott, and be on this show. I think just seeing your vision for how you can take a young orthodontist and really help them and mentor them through those early stages in their career, help them get into a good office, use the right products, all those things. I've seen you do that and carry that torch. And I've just loved mentoring younger orthodontists. I think my mom's a teacher. So 35 years, she kind of stuck it out, had a lot of grit. Teaching kindergarten and middle school. And I really could understand from her perspective why she did it for so long, because she could see that transformative impact that she had in those people's lives. And then my dad was a musician. So he studied under some of the greatest classical guitarists in the world. And then ultimately kind of did computers, but always kept that hobby or, professional background of guitar, and encouraged me to go for my dreams and pursue whatever that I wanted to do. And so that kind of that blend of artistry and creativity mixed with the teaching and mentorship from my parents really helped me get onto my path for all the things that I've been able to do. And you mentioned some of the vendor partners that I'm a part with, Ormco being the biggest one. They've really encouraged me on that route and helped me get a bigger audience with some of their groups, which has been fantastic, just to have that fulfillment for what I really want to do in my life.
How did your journey begin? Can you take us through what turned you on to dental?
Well, yeah. I think the most important thing here, Jason, is you hear that accent. That's not a Colorado accent. So, why don't you take us from the beginning? Because that's the part that's kind of interesting.
That's a good point. Well, I grew up in California, and I've practiced in Canada as well. So I've got all kinds of weird stuff going on. I have family in both areas. Okay. Met my wife in Utah at BYU. We went to dental school in California, and I teach there now at a new school called Western University, which I love. And that's really where I got kind of my start teaching and compiling a lot of the stuff that I present now started with that opportunity. But really in Arizona, I had a really good opportunity to work under Jay Park and be influenced by people like Stu Frost that came to our program and spoke to us early on. And other guys within Ormco. So Craig Andreyko and Steve Tracy were great mentors of mine. And they lived really close to me when I was in California and encouraged me to apply to orthodontics. And really seeing what they were able to do with their practice, especially with Steve. Steve Tracy had this amazing practice where it seemed like everyone that came in, he knew personally. And so I spent, several days with him. I had a nighttime clinic that I would attend on Thursdays. So I had Thursday day to go out and shadow orthodontists, and Steve would have me in his office and say, oh, so-and-so's in this circus nearby, and they're this trapeze artist. Here, let me introduce you to them. Or so-and-so's this PTA member, or so-and-so's, a teacher. And it was like, how do you know all these people? It was just this family affair. And people would come specifically just to chat with him. And he was so talented. He could kind of do run the whole ship and have those relationships. And so that was the kind of framework. When I saw a private practice orthodontist, I was like, this is what it's like. You know, you're working fast, you're highly skilled and talented, but you're making those connections with people. And that's really what I wanted in my practice. And when I went into Arizona, it was the same kind of thing. The people that I was interacting with, the vibe in that program specifically was exactly that. Let's take a greater interest in our patients' lives and have the backbone of that be amazing results, and just being clinically competent, able to do creative things and be there for your patients.
When did you know that you wanted to work in dentistry?
Yeah, so dentistry kind of caught me off guard. I was a track and field athlete in college. I did shot put and discus and football in high school. So definitely no running. You know, there was no running in my line of track and field. So I just should say field athlete. And my roommate at the time, who's a dentist now up in Washington, I said, I kind of want to be a chiropractor or work with athletes. And he's like, I'm like, well, what are you going to do? He's like, well, I'm going to be a dentist. I was like, why would you want to be a dentist? And he proceeded to tell me all the things that he liked. And I was like, that sounds pretty good. I think I'm going to do that. And so that was at that point, I just started taking those classes and being around some dentists in Utah. And I'm like, actually, I think my roommate was onto something. I'm going to try this out. And realizing that blend of artistry, working with my hands, I just love that aspect of it. And then later, mentioning those orthodontists that I shouted early on, I was like, man, you could be an engineer like Craig Andraco and work with products, teaching and mentoring people. You can be deeply involved in people's families and lives like Steve Tracy was, right? Or you can just be a master of your craft like Stu Frost was. These are all the people that kind of had little drops in my bucket, so to speak. And then getting into private practice myself and starting to, figure out, okay, what kind of orthodontist am I going to be? What blend of all these people that have inspired me is really going to come to the surface? And I think that's been really so fun doing this startup that I started about 4 years ago in Colorado. So we had some family in Colorado and then eventually said, you know what, Colorado market looks good. Found an area that was recently developed and felt like there was a lot of growth potential. And so we kind of took the dive, not knowing literally anybody in the state other than some family members, not a single dentist or referral source. Yeah.
But were you an associate or a partner somewhere prior to coming to Colorado?
Yeah. So sorry, I got to jump around, but So right after school, I met an orthodontist who I had a family member that worked for him up in Calgary, Alberta, and he was retiring or kind of in the process of thinking of exiting. And he said, "Hey, why don't you come up and work with me?" And I loved his practice. He was so efficient. I mean, everything was indirect bonding, 3D X-ray, ICAT, all the fancy stuff that I learned about. And treated his staff super well, took him on, trips all the time, and just was, had a great reputation in the community, did a lot of things for a lot of people. And so I thought, man, this is the orthodontist that I want to be. So why not work with him? And so it worked out really well. We ended up taking that practice, little rocky when the owner leaves, right? And you take over the reins. There's definitely going to be a dip. I think the banks kind of tell me typically it's 20%. And that's about what we experienced very quickly after the retiring orthodontist left. And then we were able to recover that as we doubled down on community events, sponsorships, good quality interactions and great results. And then so about 2 years later, we ended up increasing the practice about 40% in that third year. And then fourth year, about another 10%. So just about, doubled the practice size in 5 years, which was great. But as good as your practice is doing, if your wife isn't happy, right, no one's happy.
Right.
So my wife was like, you know what, I really want to move back to the States. I want to be closer to my sister down there. And we had visited Colorado multiple times. And so that's kind of a segue into finding this great opportunity in Colorado to do a startup.
Well, I've been fortunate enough to have visited practices in Canada and then obviously here in the United States. I'd be curious I've never talked to an orthodontist besides yourself who's practiced in both countries, right?
Yeah.
So what would you say is the major difference between being a clinician in Canada versus the United States?
Yeah. I love Canada. I think the doctors there are absolutely exceptional. One of the things I think that makes it that way is the high number of CE hours that they have to complete in order for licensure. I think education needs to be a big part of what we do as doctors, and that we should easily be hitting, 50 hours of CE every year, if not more. And that was kind of the baseline expectation up there. So I think that was the first thing, is that, the Canadian doctors would dress up pretty nice usually to go to CE events. And usually you see them sitting in the front row, they're very attentive. And I felt like that's something that spills over into a lot of different aspects. The other thing that is very favorable of practicing in Canada is that there's a strong kind of referral specialist, if you will, like kind of feeling that patients have. A lot more respect towards specialists, definitely a lot more used to there being a scarcity of specialists based on the universal healthcare model. So we would often find maybe a little bit more, not reverence isn't the right word, but a little bit more respect in terms of saying, well, you're the specialist, we referred to you, so we're going to come here, type of thing, versus a little bit more of the consumer mindset in the United States. I think that's we have many more specialists here in the United States. So from an aspect of like patients coming to see you, I think there's a little bit easier time of having those relationships or being able to be trusted by the people at large as a specialist up in Canada. But in the United States, there's some things I like too. I mean, there's definitely a lot more opportunities for growth. I feel like there's unique individuals in every area. I found, at least in Calgary, there was a lot of people that, had their little quadrant of the city and they really like to live there and they grew up there and they're not going to leave, And so they tend to have a little bit more groupthink in some of those areas. As we're in the United States, we can kind of say, okay, who's my ideal patient? Who's the person that I want to fill my practice with? And what are their likes and dislikes? What things would attract them, or what things, can we do to help them have a better experience? Then we can custom tailor that practice to that kind of ideal patient and really try to attract out of, maybe a larger population, those individuals. And so I found that to be a little bit easier in the United States, where we can, with our branding and our messaging and the experience driven results that we're, having in our practice, we can really create a much more cohesive group of people that come into the practice with, shared likes and dislikes, and then ultimately refer more people like them, right? Their friends and family to come to our practice. So, but no, that's a great question. Yeah, I think it's been really fun. I mean, I love both countries a lot. Love practicing in both. So it was definitely a huge experience for me. I learned a ton of stuff.
Well, the most important thing is you picked up your California accent, turned into a wee bit Canadian, and now it's starting to meld back into more of a Colorado.
We're going back, yeah, yes.
So tell us about the Colorado part. I mean, you didn't.
Yeah,
it's a pretty good story, and you've been very successful.
Yeah, well, so we had come to Colorado several times, family vacations, visiting my sister-in-law and her family, and she's got 4 kids the same age as my 4 kids. So that's just they can just pair up and pair off and have a great time. And a little milder winters than Calgary, which was always nice to come kind of almost at the cusp of winter and have a much easier time of it, where the snow doesn't stick to the ground in Colorado. And we were seeing, at the time, this is like, 2018, 2019, there was very low unemployment in Colorado, and it was definitely a net influx of people coming in because it was a little bit more affordable. And so I saw that in terms of, job reports and all those things, I'm kind of looking at demographics generally. And my wife was like, hey, I think we would really like living here. And I could see a lot of benefits to that. And so we made the decision to say, okay, let's start to, find an exit strategy up in Canada, and then do a startup. And I think the reason why I wanted to do a startup was all the things that I had learned running a business up in Canada, working with those patients, doing marketing kind of from the ground up, and understanding again, like who our ideal patient is. I really felt like if I was to take over another practice, while there's a lot of financial gain from taking over an established practice and then just spinning the wheels in maybe a slightly different direction to optimize things, I really felt like a startup gave me the opportunity to build the space that I wanted, to find the location that I wanted, and then to, just like I mentioned before, find that ideal patient and pick them out of the population, so to speak, so that we could really build a community. So went and toured some properties in 2019, and it's kind of one of those things, like you find the place, right? You just get that good feeling. And I saw this location again, didn't know any dentists in the area, didn't know really the whole daily traffic route that people would take. But I saw this plaza, and they said, okay, well, hadn't been built yet. And I said, here's what we're going to build. And I said, well, who are your other tenants that you already have signed up? And they said, well, right across from you is a Starbucks. And I'm like, okay, we're done. That's all I needed to know. If Starbucks
Right.
says it's good, then it's good enough for me. And in fact, that's actually how I hired my first employee, was someone with Starbucks experience, because,
Oh, really?
a person that works at Starbucks, man, they're taking orders quick. They're moving around, they're hustling. So if they can do that, they can easily do orthodontics. So, and the rest is kind of history. That was 2020. So we got a little bit delayed, and opened up around August, September of 2020. So we're now at year 4. And there's a lot of things that COVID actually helped us with. I think one was gave me some time to actually build a brand. And I didn't really know what branding was. And I think that's one of the things that I kind of stumbled into with business, was the difference between branding and a logo and all the other things. I think when I thought about doing a startup, the first thing was, I'll just call it Gage Orthodontics. And all our early drawings with Joe Architect, who we worked with here in Denver, all had Gage Orthodontics. And I was talking to my cousin, and she runs a branding company, Gage Branded Design. And I said, well, what do you think about this name? And she's like, well, let's do some discovery first. Let's actually dig into who your ideal client is in this area you're at, and let's do a competitive analysis. So she helped me kind of look at all these different practices, look at reviews for all different practices in my area, some great orthodontists in Parker, and to see, okay, what do people like? And then it's like, okay, what have you learned, Colby, what have you learned from practicing the last 5 years, the patients that you like? And then let's find where those intersect, and let's create a community around that. Once we did that, it was really easy to say, okay, I don't think Gage Orthodontics, like that last name, it was great when I was a defensive lineman, to have, last name Gage, but it's like, it didn't really ring for what, we were trying to create. And I'm like, look, I've looked at all kinds of trade names, and anything I could come up with that I even liked was already taken. So I said, Carmen, I was talking to my cousin, I'm like, well, if you think you can figure out a name, I'll go with it. But otherwise, we're going to choose Gage Orthodontics. So we had all this time to do this discovery during COVID, and finally came up with LevelUp Orthodontics. And that's all credit to her. And I was like, okay, this is perfect. This is exactly what I wanted, or I didn't know I wanted, that we could create with this new practice. So with all that branding and all that work, we really opened up well, and I think made a good impact early on with our referrals. And I think that was one of the things that really led to our initial success, was immediately getting referrals on board, and then just building that word of mouth as we created our community.
It's funny that you say that, because I think when I talk to doctors that either buy a practice, right, or they do a startup, I would say that it tends to be like, hey, that referral network is really difficult out of the chute, right? Because the general dentists and other dental professionals in the area have their routine. I mean, how are you able to crack into that successfully?
And just to your point, and you've picked up on that, we used Jill Allen as a consultant, and she said, especially in 2020 when it was really hard to get out there, she said we were of all her clients that she had started in recent memory, we had done more in dental referrals than any other office, which is pretty interesting. And I think part of that was because I came from Canada, and so I knew how to market to dentists, because that was really the only way we got referrals. It was basically from dentists. So rather than saying, well, I'm going to spend, $10,000 a month on, digital marketing, or I'm going to go around and hand out flyers, which I couldn't visit schools at this time. I couldn't do any school sponsored education programs, which we had done in the past. But the schools were like, no, we're not having any outside visitors due to COVID. So really the only thing I had was the dentists, and, maybe a little bit of digital marketing, but when you don't have already some traction, it was really difficult for that to take hold. So we tried direct mailers and a few other things and didn't get a ton of work from that. So we really said, okay, well, who are the dentists that are closest to me in age, who have similar practices, who seem to have a good following? And we just went and got to know them. It wasn't a pushy sales type of meeting, but I had background as a Spear Study Club leader, teaching at the dental school. I was a dentist first, right? And so I love dentistry. I love all the different aspects that go into it, not just orthodontics. So I think I was able to talk to some of the dentists about that and take interest in some of the things that they were doing, especially interdisciplinary type cases. And I had lots of good records. Records have always been a part of my practice. And teaching at the dental school, kind of forced me to compile a lot of things. And so I had a lot of good cases to show and presentations to give. I think that made a big early difference. And then just being available, if they had a question, I was like, hey, I was available. Or I had a dentist who said, hey, I have a patient who broke a lingual, fixed retainer. And I'm like, yeah, send them over. I can help you with that. And no problem. And hey, do you have a couple of EDA or, expanded function assistants that you think would benefit from some of that training? Because it sounds like you have a lot of these patients that have fixed retainers from, 10 years ago and may need them fixed or removed. And so I said, why don't you bring them over to my office? I'll train them how to place one. And then they can come back into your office and handle some of those little, odd orthodontic problems that come up. So, again, taking a little bit thought outside of the four walls of our practice, I think that really helps because that marketing to a dentist is way more powerful in the community than sending out mailers. You can spend thousands of dollars on digital marketing and all that kind of stuff. And for our office, that's like the bottom of the barrel. Those are our worst converting leads, are the ones that just find us without any connection to our existing patients or dentists that refer to us. Our best ones are the ones that have the word of mouth from us or find us on social media, because some of the people that we partner with on social media really present our practice in a favorable way and show some of the things that we're doing. So they really get our office before they come in, and that's why they're choosing us. So we have a lot of success with those referrals, and they're friends. We go to hockey games together. That's something I brought down from Canada, was picking up some hockey tickets. And the Avalanche won in 2022, which made for a really exciting few games here in Denver. So yeah, just getting back into the swing of things that I had up in Canada, bringing that to Colorado really helped us accelerate our growth really quickly.
So you were talking about, the growth and moving your practice forward. With all of those things, what challenges have you faced and how did you overcome them? What was the toughest? And what are you seeing right now as the biggest obstacle?
Yeah. So I think the biggest issue with a startup is that you don't have any consistent numbers or consistent revenue. You may have 1 month where everyone pays in full, and then the next month people choose, a minimum down payment, right? So your cash flow is all over the place. And if you have a vision for your practice, especially where you want to be and the location and the types of staff you're going to have and the types of brackets you're going to use and all those things, any of those things make sense with a certain volume, right? But I wasn't about to start and do things, somewhat, I don't want to say cheap, but do things differently just because we were a startup. I approached the startup as saying, what decisions would I make 5 years from now for the practice today? And so everything from the brackets that we use to the people that I hired, to the design that we did for the practice and the marketing types of things that we did, sponsorships, all of that was built with kind of a future mindset. So that's very expensive when you don't have money coming in to the practice immediately to afford those things. So, for example, most practices would say they want to keep their overhead in terms of practice rent, that they're paying, to 10% or less. And so if you think about that, if let's say your rent is $8,000, well, you need to be making $80,000 a month of revenue to make that one line item on your budget fit the ideal proportions. So if your rent's higher than that, then you're kind of delaying a little bit the balancing the budget, so to speak. And so that can be one of the biggest challenges in the startup, is if you pick all the most expensive things, and for good reason, it just means that it's going to take you longer before the balance sheet looks, more appropriate, I guess, or more profitable. And then I think the bigger challenge I have now is that we do have a big influx of patients during the summer. And then, we're doing very efficiently at debonding patients on time. We're doing a lot of virtual monitoring, so they're not coming into the office as much. But it's just balancing that experience versus the payroll, right? Because I can see that if our team right now is quite small. We actually only have 3 assistants. We had 5, and we had a couple move away and one go to hygiene school, and I have a TC in the front desk. So with all that, we actually are quite more efficient with a smaller team, but sometimes that comes at the expense of the experience part, right? So it's balancing that difference of, okay, we want to be really efficient, but we also want to provide, superior customer service, which is something that's just totally lacking, in today's businesses. virtually any business you go into, it's almost like we've forgotten what customer service is. And so we're trying to bring that back. So I think that for a startup, that is really the hardest thing, because you might go through waves where you're overstaffed for a while, and then you're understaffed, and then training and keeping the ball rolling can be really tricky. But it's all welcome challenges, because every year we're growing, seeing a lot of improvement in our systems and in our results. So there's just tons of good positive things that come with all that.
An amazing story. It feels like we could talk for an hour and a half, but unfortunately, this episode is coming to an end. I want everybody to go check out Dr. Gage's amazing practice at LevelUpOrtho.com. You can go there, request an appointment if you live in the Colorado, Denver, Parker, Colorado area. And Dr. Gage, if somebody wants to reach out to you, it seems like you're very willing to offer mentorship. Is there a way that people can reach out to you?
Yeah, you can find me on Facebook, or even just message our office. I'm happy to reach out. We do often lots of calls and mentoring through Ormco. So if you're interested in using some of the Ormco's products, they have a great pathway for mentorship that way. And then just reaching out, seeing me at meetings. I'm at a lot of meetings every year. So very, very approachable, and love to talk shop and hear about other people's dreams and where they're headed.
And Scott, it was such a powerful episode that we didn't even get a chance to touch on Dr. Gage's involvement in P.O.P. We should definitely have another one about that. But for those who don't know, give us a quick little snippet about what P.O.P. is and how people can reach
out. Thank you, Jason. P.O.P. is a network of private practice orthodontists. And, what we do is we come together to share best practices, ideas. One of the things that I would like to hit on today's episode that I'm really proud of our group is that we have several practices that are in the startup or first year of buying a practice that are members of our group. And they do that so that they have an opportunity to network with people like Dr. Gage and Dr. Nichols, and some of the other, our founders, Horsley, Nordfeller, and Maxfield. So I think that's one of the things I'm most excited about our group is we're a beautiful blend of doctors that have been doing this with a high rate of success. And then we also have an opportunity for young doctors to be a part of our group. And it's what keeps everything fresh and organic as well. So yes, feel free to reach out to me. You can go to our website, P.O.P-ortho.com, and schedule a call. And I'd love to share with you some of the exciting things we have going on.
And I know that Dr. Colby is not a big believer in the power of digital marketing all the time, and he's right, because every practice is different. And the important thing is knowing the facts, understanding where you stand. And that's what we're all about. So make sure you give Brain Bites Creative a call. Hit up brainbitescreative.com and set up a free consultation. On behalf of P.O.P. and the P.O.P. podcast, I'm Jason Sirotin. We'll see you next time.
P.O.P. Podcast.